Good afternoon. We are living in Novueval times, and I'm running for president. Matt 2024, MAT 2024. People have been asking me, Master, where does this all lead? Well, I'll give you a short answer, a somewhat longer answer, and then the very detailed answer, and I will timestamp them down below so you can watch the short answer and then skip around if you want. But we're already seeing the effects of climate change. It's just going to escalate year by year, and we're going to have more extreme weather, and we're going to have significantly hotter summers. And sometime around the year 2036, we are going to see the worldwide population growth reverse. It is already starting to plateau. It's going to reach a peak, and then it's going to start to drop. At which point, especially in this country, industry will, if it hadn't already come to a halt, and I don't mean a complete halt. There will still be industry, but it'll be less and less and less all the time. And capitalism will just crumble. How quickly that's going to fall apart is anybody's guess. But if by that time the dollar as the reserve currency is gone, and I don't mean the dollar is necessarily gone, but it's no longer the reserve currency, and I believe that's within the next maybe 7 years at most, the reserve currency status of the U.S. dollar will be gone. And if it hasn't, by the time that population growth reverses, it will then, definitely. Basically, in the short term, we're going to see widespread societal collapse, which MIT had predicted back in 1972, sometime around the year 2040. And that study was actually just recently revisited by a major international consulting firm, accounting firm. They are actually one of the big four in the world, so they have absolutely no interest in seeing that kind of thing go down, and especially coming to the conclusion that, yes, this is where we're headed, and publishing the results. This is not in their best interest. So for them to have done that is to say, yeah, the best minds that we have in this country are of the opinion we are headed for widespread societal collapse. And that's basically the short term, the next couple of decades. Over the next century, we are headed back to the Iron Age. And there's a lot going into all of that, and I think it needs further analysis, so I am going to do that now. Okay, to expand on what I've said already, that 1972 study, they actually came up with 3 results using different inputs in terms of variables, which the variables they used were population, industrial output, pollution, food production, and resources. And as I said, predicting the future is a crapshoot. But to make it as sophisticated and professional as possible, they used different variables. They used different amounts for the variables, and one was business as usual, just a projection. If we keep going the way we've been going, based on what we've seen in the past, how we've been doing things, what's going to happen, and using that projection, which to my way of thinking is the most realistic, because the other 2 are based on, okay, we see what's happening, we understand we're screwing things up, we need to change. We have seen throughout history that doesn't happen. It doesn't matter how many people see things are going poorly, something needs to happen, and now, it doesn't matter how many see this, how loud they are, things generally continue to trundle in the same direction. And of course, things are not always this way. I mean, people do all kinds of things in order to change the trajectory of history. But as big as the events of just our lifetime, as big as they have seemed, in terms of how much they have affected what we're dealing with now, they're minuscule. I mean, we think of these things as huge, World War II. Oh my God, that changed the whole world. Well, yes and no. I mean, it changed a lot of borders, it changed a lot of populations, it changed a lot of economic and political systems over the course of a wide span of geography and a lot of time concerning what we're used to dealing with, the span of a human lifetime. In terms of changing how we fundamentally do things in the industrialized world, it didn't change that, maybe a smidge. but that's about it. As a matter of fact, in terms of how we do things industrially, it didn't really set us back. It propelled us forward. But I don't want to get into all that. That's another video altogether, and not one that I'm interested in making. My point is, we look at the world-changing events that have happened in our lifetime or in recent history, and these things are huge to us. In geological terms, in biological terms, what that is doing, except in negative ways, in biology especially, there's not huge changes taking place. And in terms of how things tend to unfold, that is, systems and processes per the natural order of things, even man-made systems and processes, economic and political systems, civilizations, cultures, societies, all of these things, they all go up and down. Everything in the universe is cyclical. There's no getting away from that. The graph never always goes up and to the right. And I know that's going to be backwards because, that's what it looks like to me, but it's going to be reversed when you see it. That's neither here nor there. What they looked at, their business as usual model, predicted that given these 5 variables, population, industrial output, pollution, food production, resources, those are all going to start going down. Well, pollution is going to continue to go up. The other things that we want are going to go down. And in terms of pollution, they really didn't take into account pollution like CO2 and climate change. They were somewhat aware of climate change back then, but that was like on the periphery. That is not the thing it has become in this day and age. And for the people who say, oh, that's just a hoax or whatever your skepticism or denial is, it's real, it's measurable in terms of weather, in terms of temperature. We see these things happening nearly daily. This summer is going to be a brutal testament to what we have done to this world. And I may be wrong. It may just be another relatively normal summer, i.e. they're all getting hotter, but nothing that drastic. I think we're going to see some real changes this summer. What with the Arctic and the Antarctic being as hot as they are right now, I think we're already seeing that. Given what we saw just in the last couple of years in terms of floods in the Midwest, all the wildfires in California and the Pacific Northwest and Canada, it's just going to be insane. I mean, we saw that cold snap in Texas and this is what happens, even when we have the evidence right in front of us. Maybe this doesn't mean climate change. Maybe this is just a fluke, but it needs tending to. Texas is freezing. Texans are not used to or prepared for that. We need to do something about it. What does the government say? Hey, you can't count on us. This is your problem. This is where we're at. This is going to be more and more a part of it. Our law and order society will go to great pains to throw a lot of people in jail for petty, stupid shit. And yet the real problems we suffer as a living organism, they're not concerned about that. That's your problem. But to continue on, you've got those 5 factors. And as I said, in terms of pollution, they weren't concerned whatsoever about pollution, meaning CO2 and what that's going to do to climate, because they weren't aware of how drastic that would become. Also, EDCs. They weren't aware of what EDCs actually were and what they were going to do to us as a species. And not just us, they're affecting other species also. And that's another thing that's not really a part of their study, and that is we are in the beginning or approaching the middle anyways of the 6th great extinction event. And we, as a living organism, rely on other living organisms, and there is a tipping point. You can only kill off so many of those before it starts to affect your own species in ways that you couldn't possibly predict. And we're going to see that also. But yeah, you've got climate change, you've got EDCs, and you've got the extinction event going on, which really as independent factors didn't even enter into this study. But now we're discovering, wow, this stuff is big, this stuff is scary. And on top of that, the political unrest that we're seeing now, this 2-party system, which just doesn't work. And you may say, well, what do you mean it doesn't work? It's worked so far. Well, yes and no. However much you might have thought it was good enough before, it's certainly not good enough now. And this 2-party system where it's this us and them mentality, these 2 teams, like 2 sports teams that are competing against each other instead of doing what is best for we the people, and are endeavoring to just garner more power all the time to their side, and in fact in many ways are not even 2 political parties but more like one political party in the way they make policy, and implement it, it's really for a country that thinks of itself as being this exceptional, this free, and this democratic. Let's just forget about the exceptionalism and accept the fact we are the least free country, at least of the westernized nations, possibly all of the industrial nations, and possibly the whole world. We have more jailed and incarcerated in this country in pure numbers and per capita than any other country in the world. There's something really wrong with that, and that is not law and order. Law and order is code for oppress and control. And I know that not everybody who is part of the whole law and order scheme understands that they're part of the oppression and control that's being practiced, and it's just part of the conspire ignorance that enters into it. And let me just give you an example of how law and order disrupts communities. Because you either have one or the other. You either have more law and order or you have more freedom. And there was a woman, and it was either Illinois or Michigan, you'll have to look it up, but she was watching her neighbor's children before school so they wouldn't have to wait outside for the school bus. It turns out that another neighbor complained about that, and she couldn't do that because it was considered childcare. She couldn't just, for free, watch her neighbor's children before school after whatever it was, 5 days, 7 days, 14 days, whatever the time limit was on it. But she was threatened with arrest. She was told, if you continue to watch your neighbor's children, an act of community and neighborliness that supposedly we are supposed to practice. But no, the government doesn't want us to be communities. The government wants to set all the standards, rules, regulations, and we do not govern ourselves. So that's how that works. And that is the rule of unintended consequences, which enters into every single law that we put out there. So that, for example, if you've got a guy who's selling loosies, single cigarettes for 50 cents a piece, that not only it's just a misdemeanor, but that's also under the law a death sentence. Yes, that's how it turned out. We're all aware of that. If you're not aware of that, look that up also. But basically, what I see happening is there's going to be more and harsher legislation concerning the very things that we're up against because of what we're doing to the Earth's ability to sustain us. And it's just going to make it harder on us all the time. And, for example, what we're already seeing is like Monsanto saying, no, you don't own your means of food production. You have to get it from us. John Deere saying, no, you can't fix your tractors in the field. You have to bring them to us. Communities that say, no, you can't have drought-resistant or desert plants or gravel in your yard. You have to have grass. Even if that means you're taking it out of the Colorado River and denying farmers their ability to grow crops for the nation, you have to have grass. This is the kind of thing we do. This is how we practice things now. It's only going to get worse. And when I say it's only going to get worse, it's not going to get worse just in those specific examples. It's going to get worse in terms of you're going to have continually more displaced people because of the economic system we practice, coupled with conditions which are going to deteriorate and quicker as we go down the line. So you're going to have more displaced people. We already have a slew of laws against the homeless already. It's just going to get worse as we have even more homeless out there. And things like, growing vegetables in your yard. There's a lot of places where you can't do that. Maybe you can do it everywhere in your backyard, but there's a lot of places that say, no, you can't do it in your front yard. As we come up against more food shortages, and we're already seeing food shortages. Don't anybody kid yourself. Chocolate, for example. There are certain things I'm stockpiling because I see that they're just consistently running out of this stuff, and some places they don't even bother. It's like, we're not even going to try and get that. It's too hard or too expensive or too whatever. We're just not going to carry that anymore. And you're going to see more and more of that as time goes on. And as there are more food shortages and it gets increasingly expensive, whatever is left, people are going to want to grow their own. And you're going to have communities that say, no, we don't care if you're doing it for survival. It's against our rules. And the thing about rules, the thing about law and order is, you make a law, no matter how good an idea it might have seemed in the moment, as soon as you realize, boy, this was stupid, we never should have done this, it's very hard to take off the books. That's just how it works. You can't make a law and then say, oops, we screwed up, well, we'll just change it. That's not how it works. Unfortunately, you make a law and you have to jump through all kinds of hurdles then to take it off the books. And that's another reason to just not make laws. You know, we've got laws on the books, blue laws they're called, things like going back to the 1800s, you can't go out of your house for an hour after eating garlic, or you can't go out of your house if your dress is a quarter of an inch above your ankles, or, you know, just all this puritanical and other stuff that they thought it was a good idea at the time, and now they're still on the books because people just aren't paying attention, or when they do realize, oh my God, we got a lot of stupid laws on the books. There's so many of them that nobody in the course of one term, and possibly even their lifetime as a politician, is going to be able to look them all up and get rid of them all. I can't remember. I think it's the GAO that wanted to know how many federal laws there were on the books. Whatever organization, whatever branch of government, whomever decided we should actually have a count. They looked into it. They gave up. There are so many federal laws that they stopped counting because there were too many. There were too many to count. Remember, this country started with the Constitution as federal law. You can read the Constitution in a couple of hours if you're kind of slow. It's a little bit complicated in places, but it's not that lengthy a document. That's how we started. That was our federal law. This is what the government's allowed to do. This is what the government's not allowed to do. Everything else is left to the states. And then however many state laws there were, that's what it was. There's no more than that at this time. I'm certainly not going to try and figure that out. It's really not important for this video, but this is what we become. There are, for lack of a more sophisticated, elegant way of explaining it, there are vortices within entropy which allow small portions of the vastness of the universe to become more complex before they break down again. What we're seeing in terms of life is one of those things, and especially human culture and society, because that is possibly the most complex thing we deal with. Just going out every day and getting along with everybody else in the world, that's involved. But in terms of that, it can only get so complex before it begins to break down again. And there is entropy in our systems also, whether it's the economy, whether it's the arts, whether it's athletics, whatever, anything we devise, anything we design and create, it can only get so complex that it's going to break down again. And in terms of it in total, we're going to see all of that just come crumbling apart because, let's face it, civilizations grew greater, and by greater I mean larger, more vast, and more influential over time until we've got this one where we're all connected. It's not a Western civilization or an Eastern or a North-South or anything like that. Everything that every country does anymore affects every other country in some fashion to some degree. We're all interconnected. It's all incredibly complex now, and I'm not saying that we never should have done this. It's just going to come apart, but we did this, and it is going to come apart. And now that I've glanced upon that notion of finger pointing, trying to assess blame, trying to say what we did, oh my God, how could we not have seen, especially in terms of like climate change, all the pollution we've created because of industry and commerce and consumption. These things were unavoidable. And if it wasn't these things, it just would have been other things. I mean, civilizations, cultures, societies, everything in the universe, the sun, the stars, the solar system, the galaxies, it all comes together, coalesces, becomes a system, and then falls apart eventually. And sometimes this takes months or years or decades. Sometimes it takes billions of years. Even the universe, however many billions or trillions of years it turns out to exist, sometime, somehow, some way it is going to fall apart itself because of entropy. This is the way things work. And even if they don't go up and then come down and fall apart, like a sun, like a star, becoming a collection of dust and gases until it's massive enough where it ignites and you've got fusion and it goes up and maybe plateaus for a long time or maybe goes up and slowly diminishes or however the graph of its life cycle looks. It starts, it gets as big as it's going to get, and then whatever happens. Well, it just got too windy out there to do that anymore, so here I am. I'm just going to finish up in here. Yeah, everything is cyclical. civilizations, empires, what have you, are going to get as big as they're going to get, and then they're going to fall apart, however that looks. There's no getting around it. Anything we try to do, mankind, it's only going to get so big, and then it's going to fall apart. That is just nature's way. I'm sorry. I wish I could change that. I wish there was any collection or body or anything of people that could do that. Nobody can. Nobody can. They're okay. So this is where I think it's going. I think between mostly just climate change, the diminishing in population because of EDCs and because of all the other factors on top of that, just shortages. Our lifespans are in fact starting to shrink now. They went up as probably high as they're going to go in this country, and under Trump, of course, they started to diminish. So all the generations from now on, their lifespans will decrease. And yeah, this is a prediction. There are no guarantees. It could turn around. We could go back the other way, but I don't see it happening. Technology is going to start to falter, and however much progress we may be making in certain aspects of technology, however much AI or whatever the algorithms or whatever are growing, I think we're going to see a lot of it just going backwards. And just in terms of, as we're having shortages, we're going to be having shortages. We're going to be having shortages, especially of the most complex and least necessary things to begin with. I mean, not right at the very beginning, but as there are enough shortages where it really starts to impact the quality of life. We're not going to worry about mining rare earths and the stuff we need to make the electronics, to make the robotics and the quantum computers and whatever else they're coming up with that they think is going to make our life, like the Jetsons. Soon, when there are enough transportation issues, when there are enough infrastructure issues, when there are enough issues altogether that are really impacting the quality of life for most of the people, and we actually see that already in the world, but when we see it in Western industrialized society, when we see the quality of life start to diminish drastically, we're not going to be worried about phones and computers and AI and new software programs and apps and what have you to keep track of people and more cameras and stuff like that. I mean, yeah, the rich and the powerful will always be pushing more of that to keep track of us. But it's going to get to a point where they need people to make all that stuff, to maintain all that stuff, to actually implement it, to put it up in the world and to make sure it's up and running. And when you've got enough people that are not putting food on the table, they're not going to work every day to make sure the damn cameras are following people around. That's a very limited example, but that's going to be part of it. When enough people are suffering a quality of life issue because the job they have cannot put necessities on the table, work no longer becomes important. And you saw at least some of that during the Great Depression. You were either out there scrambling for work or a line for the soup kitchen every day, or you were out there in the woods and the fields actually getting food from where it originally comes from. And it's going to come to a point where more and more people are doing that. They're going out in the nature to get their food because it's just too time and energy intensive to actually work for or stand in line for. And one of the interesting things about the Great Depression is life expectancy actually went up. And what they speculate are the reasons for that is, first, people were eating less, which we eat too much in this country. And not only too much, but just crappy food on top of that. We're possibly the only society in the history of societies who eats too much food and is still malnourished. But they were eating less and they were more active. Because let's face it, when you don't have enough money to put food on the table, you're out there doing something to put something in your belly. So, yeah, life expectancies actually went up during the Depression. So, to get back to the whole notion of, oh my God, we should have known better. How can this possibly have happened to the great culture that we are? Everything is cyclical. This would have happened regardless of who was in charge, regardless of who was born and did what, regardless of who lived and died. There was no getting around this. There is no, well, this time we're going to do it differently, and nature and natural cycles are not going to enter into, when we try to, the more we try to force, for example, our imprint upon the economy to make it always go up, the graph is always going up and to the right. We can smooth out the ups and downs to a certain extent, but when the downturn does come, it's so much more drastic than it would have been if we just let a free market economy be a free market economy. Get your fingers out of the Fed, get your fingers out of the gold standard. Everything that we've done has made it worse over the long term. Untying the dollar from gold, the Federal Reserve deciding who gets money, which banks get how much money, which companies get how many subsidies, stuff like that. I know that is not totally the purview of the Fed, but the Fed has a lot of say in the economy, and the Fed has done a pretty piss poor job for most of the population, although they've done a sterling job for a very small portion of the population. And that's a great deal of the reason we have the wealth gap that we do. Structures like the Federal Reserve, who decide who wins and who loses. These billionaires are not out there doing it on their own, rolling up their sleeves and with their own brains and elbow grease going out there and making billions of dollars. No, that ain't how it works. I'm sorry to bust the bubble of all the libertarians who think, for example, Elon Musk is the GOAT. He's not. He got billions of dollars from the government to make a product that only the wealthy can afford, does not do as promised, and is losing money on every sale. Now, if you call that the GOAT, I could do that. Give me $4 billion. I guarantee you I could do even worse than he did. I guarantee you. But finger pointing, all of that, it's not going to help. Being prepared psychologically, forming communities who are ready for the nonsense that is coming down the pike, that's what you need to do. Food, water, and air, all of which is being destroyed by this CAFOA SWEC, this system of capitalism that we practice. These things are all being destroyed by that. And it's bad enough. It's bad enough that we're going to see shortages on top of everything else we have to deal with to begin with. But the quality of them are continually being destroyed. So we are not only going to have to make sure we don't have shortages, but we are going to have to try to improve the quality that has been diminished through this knucklehead system that we practice. That's where I see it going. Don't despair, prepare. And we're going back to the Iron Age. Things are going to get really hectic for a long time. Climate change is only going to get worse before it gets better, if it ever does. And if it never does, that's the end of humanity. But even if it does get better, we're talking at least centuries, maybe thousands of years that we have to struggle through before we have anything like the climate that we've seen in the last few thousand years now. That's really hard to swallow, if indeed it does all turn out that way, but that's where I see it going. And as I said, finger pointing, being upset, whatever, that doesn't change anything. What we're dealing with, it just is. Saying it's right or wrong, there are a couple of lines from a poem. I think they're probably the most relative lines in poetry that we as humanity have. And they go like this. Beyond the notions of good and bad, or right and wrong, there is a field. I will meet you there. I think that is so profound, and I think the closer to that you can live your life, the more balanced you will be, the more psychologically and emotionally balanced you will be, the more able you will be to respond to whatever is set down in front of you. And obviously that's what you want to be as a person, the one who is the most capable in dealing with whatever happens. And also Shakespeare said it in a slightly different way, but it goes like this. Things are neither good nor bad, but thinking makes them so. A lot of stupid things are going to happen in your life, even if nothing about what I've just talked of comes to be. Even if any extreme weather that we've seen just happens to be a fluke and everything goes back to the way it was, even if politics settle down and we have something more along the lines of what we were used to back in the 1900s, which is a far cry different than what we've seen these last few years. Even if everything that I'm predicting doesn't come to pass, there's still going to be a lot of crazy things that happen in your life. And to say that shouldn't have happened doesn't change it happening. It has happened. This just is. You need to deal with things. And the more prepared you are, there's always going to be hurricanes. There are always going to be tornadoes and tidal waves and earthquakes and, just plain bad weather. There's always going to be power shortages. There are always going to be things that happen. That never goes away, even if climate change turns out to be a Chinese hoax. Regardless of what anybody says about anything, things are going to happen. And a lot of them are going to be bad. That is just the nature of events as they unfold in the universe. We have very, very little control over that. Being able to respond to them in the most appropriate way possible is the best solution, because bitching never changes anything. Whether you're doing it to your fellow man just to express your frustration, or you're doing it in here because nobody wants to hear you, but you still got to say it, it doesn't matter. As soon as you can get past that, which is something we all have to deal with, but as soon as you can get past that, the better off you will be. And I'll end this with what Bruce Lee said, and that was, do not pray for an easy life. Pray for the strength to endure a hard one. And along those lines, the Chinese have an ancient saying which goes like this: may you live in interesting times. Well, here we are. So, let me just end this by saying summer is coming. This one will be long. Gird your loins. And I thank you for watching. And if you didn't watch, well then, what's wrong with you, man? Alright, talk to you soon.